So how do you as a human decide what you're worth? How do you look at yourself and see where your value is? I read that if I took all the components of my body and separated them all out, and I sold all those different components, it'd be worth about $1. On the other hand, I also heard that if I was to sell that pint of blood that I gave this past week on the black market, it's worth about $500. No, actually about $300. It's the spleen that's worth $500. So I'm asking myself, could I live without a spleen for $500? Maybe. If I needed a little bit more money, I could sell my gallbladder for $1,200 on the black market. And if I really wanted to invest in a great retirement, you can get over $260,000 for a kidney. So, if you portioned up all your different parts, you wouldn't have much of you left, but you'd have a lot of money. So apparently, we're pretty valuable. How do you find what you're worth? This past week, we were every month the pastors get together with the representatives of Vine Maple Place, and they give a kind of report as what's been happening. And this week, their person who is called the employment specialist was there sharing with us. And she was talking about some of the processes with these people, both men and women, who have no idea how to get a job or how to maintain a job or how to find employment. And one of their lines is, "Can you help me can you get a job for me?" And she'll always reply, and she says, "No, but I can help you to get one." And one of the first things she does is to help them create a resume. And she said the look on some of their faces when they see a resume of themselves for the first time is amazing. As they look over and they realize all of the strengths that they had no idea. And to see that, one lady was just moved to tears and wanted to put it on the wall. Because these are people that are already struggling with their self-worth. And sometimes our self-worth is side-railed by events of life. She also told a story about one lady that came in on Thursday, and she was just nearly in tears in frustration with her work, and she says, "I'm going to quit there on Monday." And she said, "Well, before you do that, let's spend some time talking about it." And so she set aside some time, and she talked about what was happening at work, how the manager was managing, what types of things she was doing, and tried to help explain to her what was going on. And so she decided to give it another shot, and she continued to work with her. And within 3 months, not only did she have an amazing relationship with her manager, but her manager had promoted her, given her a raise, and she loved going to work. She says, "I can't wait to go to work in the morning. I love it," because her perspective needed some change. So it's really easy to have our self-worth diverted or to channeled off in a poor direction. But how do we as humanity value one another? And I think predominantly it comes from our actions. I came across this sign this week. It says this: "A strong, lean, and well-built physique represents more than just vanity. It reflects something money can't buy, something you can't be given and can't inherit. It reflects something you can't steal or borrow from time to time. It reflects something you can't keep without a constant love, hard work, and attention. It shows dedication, it shows self-respect, it shows discipline, it shows perseverance, it shows dignity, it shows work ethic, it shows passion." So is that a reflection of human worth? When all those things are part of us and we're self-disciplined and have a good physique? Historically, humans had valued one another through the activities that they've performed. The giants of history are people who accomplished something. Maybe they were explorers. Maybe they were at the forefront of a movement of some time, like the women's suffrage movement. Maybe they were people that had discovered new things. Maybe they were people that conquered new areas. Maybe they were people that accomplished amazing feats. They're all action-related. And also, if we bring it back to contemporary, there are things like sports. There's some guy just bought a house over here. Sherman. Yeah, just bought it. He's our neighbor. And we were joking on the way home that we should swing in there, give him a plate of cookies, and invite him to church, because he just lives right over here. But see, our intention is because he's famous, because he is an exceptional, what position he played, tight end or something? Corner, okay. See, I'm really into football. But yeah, because he's amazing out there on the football field. And so we want to identify with him. He's a person of action. He has great worth. Same thing is true of movie stars. They've acquired fame because they're excellent at pretending to be someone that they're not. And wow, they're just so amazing at it. And they get a lot of wealth. And so they have accomplished this amusing thing for humanity. They entertain us. And the same thing is true of the wealthy. We have great admiration for the wealth. Every year we look for who's the wealthiest people in the world, and we want to know if there's anyone from Seattle that might be on that list. Because wealth is amazing. Regardless of the fact that most of the people who are wealthy did so at the expense of people. They roughshod over people, they abused people, they used people, they took advantage of people. One show that I sometimes find somewhat amusing is Shark Tank. And it isn't because of the sharks. Those people are irritating and annoying to me. But I'm interested because of the inventions and the things that people come up with. I go, well, that's an interesting idea. But as you look at the lives of those individuals, you realize that their entire God, everything about them has to do with the accumulation of more wealth. And in our society, in our world, they are the people who have value. It also somewhat distorts our theology, I think, because we presume that God must value people who do certain activities. Now, let me just turn with you, or let me turn to a passage in 2 Corinthians and tell you why I think that this is a reflection of that. In 2 Corinthians in the 5th chapter, and I'll probably be done before you get there, but you can turn if you want. But he's talking about bodies and about the purpose of bodies and how our bodies function and how we live within these bodies, but the bodies are just shells of who we truly are. They're not representative of our true worth, but there's this relationship there. And then at the end of this whole discourse, he says this, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due us for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad." And so, see, we interpret that and we say what that means is that at the end of after we're dead, the next thing that happens is that we're going to sit down with God and he's going to tell us all the good and the bad things that we did in our life. The actions. It's all about the activities. And so I have heard people present this idea that it's like the final trip to the woodshed before you get to go to heaven. One last good spanking for all the bad activities you did. And there's this picture of you sitting down and everybody else is watching. There's this giant screen and there's this video of all the rotten things you did in your entire life. Have you sort of gotten that picture? And so you better be careful what you do because someday we're all going to see it. And I'm thinking, that is worse than hell. I don't want you to see all the bad things I did in my life, all the thoughts I had. That's just horrific. Is that the kind of God that we serve? That is going to reveal all that horrible, horrible stuff? And that's how we should live our life in fear of that? I have a different interpretation of that passage. I'm not going to tell you what it is. But you can think about it for a week. And if you ask me next Sunday, I might tell you. But before I tell you mine, I have to ask you what you think it means. So, But that sort of just illustrates that we are caught in this trap of activity being what makes us valuable. And so we look at our actions, we look at the actions of people around us, and we evaluate one another. All of this brings us to our message this morning, which is message number 2 on the person of David, King David. And we did 2 weeks on Saul. We're doing 2 weeks on David, and next week we're going to start with Solomon. But 2 weeks ago, didn't the youth do amazing? Wow, I just enjoyed last Sunday so much. What a great job. So proud of our youth. But 2 weeks ago, we talked about the feature of David that just struck me was his ability to forgive other people. And so We come to David again, and I realize, and I confessed to you 2 weeks ago that David's not somebody that I particularly am fond of, that he's not one of the heroes of the faith for me. And I was thinking this week, the reason for that is because I judge David on his actions. The same thing. I'm doing the exact same thing. I judge him for his actions. The way that he treated his children, the way that he treated his wives, the type of general that he was at times. I was watching a special on the D-Day invasion, and they were interviewing people who were generals, and they were talking about the perspective of Bradley and other generals who were overseeing that entire invasion. And they said that in that position, you cannot look at the soldiers as people. You have to look at them as resources. And you view them as resources, and you say, how many of these resources can I expend to accomplish this goal? And I heard that, and my heart just sank. How can you ever in any position in life come to a place where you don't see humans as humans? That is just so horrible. And yet I see that in David. He did that constantly. He used people to accomplish his task. So I am evaluating David based on his actions. And so I have to come back and say, all right, I apologize. And I'll probably have to apologize to David someday. So what is it that God loves about David? When Samuel comes to anoint him, God says this to Samuel: do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him, talking about Saul. The Lord does not look at things people look at. People look at the outward appearance or their actions, but the Lord looks at the heart. The Bible says that what's most important about David and what's most important about us is our heart. Now, let me just begin by saying that often our heart dictates our actions. And oftentimes what we admire in people's actions isn't because of the actions, but because of their hearts. But we need to be careful that it's the heart that we value in people and in ourselves, and that it's the heart that we cultivate, not simply doing the actions. There are lots of other religions that emphasize actions. I was having a discussion 2 weeks ago when I was in Nashville with Julie, and we were talking about, she and Adam and I, if Christianity didn't exist, what religion would you participate in? I think the consensus was Buddhism, because there are a lot of the philosophy of Buddhism is very, very close to some of the philosophies of Christianity. But the huge problem with Buddhism is that there's so much of it is actions. So much of it is dependent upon your actions. There's no transformation of your heart. There's just actions that you do to accomplish in life. But in Christianity, with Jesus, with God, the great rescue plan begins with a transformation of our heart. Someone asked me this past week, what was the difference between people encountering God in the Old Testament and people encountering God in the New Testament, and how does the cross fit into that? And my answer to them was, I believe that people in the Old Testament were saved exactly the same way that people in the New Testament were saved. And that salvation is not something which... Salvation is a reconnection to God. Salvation is the acknowledgement and the realization that something is missing in our lives and we need to reconnect with it. People weren't saved by the law. Galatians makes that very clear. The law just revealed people's need to be saved. It brought them in the position of saying, you know what, these actions are not doing anything. I still feel that huge emptiness in my heart. And so I need to connect with Yahweh. I need to connect with my Creator. And that connection was the same. The cross, in some mysterious way, made that all possible. For them, it was in the future. For us, it's in the past. But in fact, I think the process of salvation is the same. It's the connection to God. It's the transformation, the beginning of the transformation of our heart. So what kinds of things do we see in the life of David that made him a person that God claims to be a man after his own heart? Well, at our last sermon, we talked about forgiveness. And I don't want to talk about that very much more, except to say that if you don't have forgiveness in your heart, if you can't continue to cultivate forgiveness, it will create a root of bitterness in your soul. I was trying to dig out a dandelion the other day. It was a monster. It was, like one of these huge dinner-sized plate leaves. And I wanted to get to the very bottom of it. Dug all around there as far as I could get down there. Got a good hold of the root, pulled up. What happened? Snapped off. I can't tell you how many hundreds of dandelions I've dug up in my life. You never get the whole root. There's always something down there that sprouts again. The same thing is true of an inability to forgive. It leaves something in your heart that will fester and grow. And, when we talked about this, we acknowledge that sometimes forgiveness is a process. It does take a long time. And it doesn't mean that it will completely reestablish all the trust that was there before. Trust may be broken. It may not be repaired. But you have to get to a place where you can say, you know what? This person's broken. I'm broken. I forgive them. I can be civil with them. I can associate with them. I can learn to love them again. Because love is an action. It's not an emotion. David was a person of amazing forgiveness. In the cultivation of our heart, we have got to be people of forgiveness as well. The other thing about David was that he was a champion for the poor and for those who were lost. Jesus said that the essence of following him was revealed in how we demonstrated our actions to the poor and to the needy, to the widows and the orphans. And we live in a country that is extremely wealthy, and Christians are the most generous of any giving group in the United States. That's been shown statistically over and over again. But, still, we just give a pittance, really. And some of you are doing amazing things. I want to acknowledge that. Working with refugees, working with poor, working with rescuing kids from the sex trade. There's a lot of things that you're doing, and it just needs to be a part of our heart building that we acknowledge and recognize when we see these people on the side of the road, not to just simply say, that's a worthless human being. They should go get a job. We need to, every time, acknowledge that is a worthful. Valuable. Thank you. That is a human of great worth in God's sight, and as messed up as their lives may be, probably not any more messed up than mine. And being open to allowing God to use us and our resources to be rescuers. David was a great rescuer. It says when he fled Saul and went down to the rock, there was a huge group of people that went and hung out with him. It was the closest thing that we have had in history to a Robin Hood that I know of. He didn't ask them to come with him. They just showed up. And these were not evil people. These were broken and wounded people. The reason that I know that they're not evil people is because David's heart. They don't want to hang around with a guy who was basically good in his heart. Evil people want to hang out with evil people. These were broken people that saw in David something that they needed. He had a heart for them. He loved them. They could see that when they saw him. He had compassion upon them. Our attitude toward the poor. The other thing about David is that he was a person of praise, and that's obvious from the fact that all the Psalms that he wrote, and thousands and thousands that weren't recorded, he was a person that determined that praise was going to be a part of his life. And what really determines our worth and my worth is that when I'm in the midst of a really difficult situation, when life has thrown everything it possibly can to us, if out of that I can see the cross. If out of that I can come and say, God, I cannot thank you for these circumstances, but I thank you for yourself. I thank you for who you are. I thank you for rescuing my life, my hope, my soul. And someday, Lord, I hope to look back on this and thank you for this as well. And you can see that in the Psalms. David goes through the imprecatory Psalms where he is in anguish about the circumstances of his life. But then the next Psalm, he breaks into joy and thanksgiving for his amazing God, a person of praise. The last thing, this is just an exploration. I'm not giving you all the answers to how to build, to become a person of heart, God's heart. These are just some suggestions, and there are many, many other things as well. But one of the things that happens is that it happens in the context of God's people. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say that the best place for me to worship is out in the woods by myself. You know, some valuable worship happens out there in the woods by yourself. But there's also some things out there that will never happen. You will never experience the growth that happens in community all by yourself. In community, things will happen in your heart that will never happen anyplace else. We need to be people at some times of isolation, but we also need to be people of community as well. Now I want you to exercise that. I'm going to ask you to stand. I'm going to pray a benediction. Then I want you to get a cup of coffee, enjoy the new sidewalk, visit with each other, maybe pray for someone, love someone, encourage someone. Stand with me if you would.